Engines idled low in the gray half-light as armored vehicles lined the dirt road at the valley's edge. Tracks clinked. Doors slammed. Men adjusted straps and checked weapons with the quiet confidence of a unit that believed numbers alone made them unstoppable. Someone near the command truck chuckled. "Intel's talking about a lone female sniper again," a sergeant said, shaking his head. "Every time we roll into a new sector, it's the same fairy tale." A few soldiers laughed. "Yeah," another added. "One shooter doesn't stall a battalion." A younger private hesitated before speaking. "They said she was seen here 3 days ago," he murmured. "High Ridge. Western side." The words floated in the air for a moment, then disappeared beneath more laughter. Mortars fired. The valley exploded into sound. Shockwaves rolled across broken concrete and twisted steel. Dust leapt into the air. Fire blossomed along the ridgeline. Radios came alive with overlapping voices, grid calls, movement reports, shouted orders. Staff Sergeant Jake Harlan was in the middle of giving a hand signal when his sentence ended in a wet snap. He dropped straight down. Specialist Owen Pike turned toward him and collapsed beside him. 2 bodies. 2 clean hits. No echo. No visible muzzle flash. No direction. The radios went quiet for half a second. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Cross stared at the fallen men, then slowly lifted his eyes toward the ruined factory looming over the valley. One unseen shooter had just frozen an entire element. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to FOB Veteran Stories, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The night before the valley burned, Mara Holt stood at the edge of a narrow dirt road and watched the last vehicle of her team disappear into darkness. No one argued with her. No one tried to stop her. Her reassignment orders were real. A different sector, a different mission. Paperwork signed and logged hours earlier. She simply did not climb aboard. When the engine noise faded, the valley became quiet in a way that only existed before something terrible happened. Mara adjusted the strap on her rucksack and turned toward the shadowed slope. She moved alone. She always had. Her rifle was older than most of the weapons in the unit. The finish had been worn smooth in places by years of handling. The scope housing carried a long scratch down one side, sealed with epoxy and patience. The bipod legs did not fold evenly anymore. One always lagged half a second behind the other. None of it bothered her. She trusted that rifle the way some people trusted another human being. Mara had enlisted at 19. No hometown sending her off. No parents standing on a parade field. She had grown up drifting between foster homes, learning early that depending on people usually ended in disappointment. The Army had been the first place where rules stayed the same, where effort mattered, where silence was not a weakness. She spoke when she needed to. Most of the time, she didn't need to. By midnight, Mara was inside the valley, not moving fast, not moving slow, moving correctly. She avoided roads, avoided open ground, avoided anything that looked easy. She climbed until her calves burned, then climbed another 100 meters. She lay flat and studied the industrial ruins below through glass that reflected nothing. The factory sat at the center like a rotting tooth. Collapsed walls, hollow windows, twisted rebar poking through concrete like broken ribs. Around it stretched smaller structures. Storage sheds, half-buried houses, cratered courtyards. To anyone else, it looked like chaos. To Mara, it was geometry. She pulled a grease pencil from her sleeve and marked small lines on a folded map. Angles, distances, dead space. She counted steps between rocks, measured slopes with her eye, tested each surface with slow pressure before committing her weight. Loose gravel got brushed aside, crumbling concrete got bypassed. Anything that shifted even slightly was removed from her mental map. She did not look for one perfect hide. She built 12 shallow depressions behind collapsed walls. A firing notch chipped into a cinder block. A broken stairwell that allowed a prone position and a backward slide into darkness. A ventilation shaft big enough to swallow her rifle. Each position had 2 exits. Some had 3. None of them stayed occupied for more than a few minutes. By 3 in the morning, her hands were black with dust. Her uniform smelled like old rust and damp earth. She did not rest. She lay still for 10 minutes at a time, slowing her breathing, then moved again. Below, miles away, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Cross studied satellite images glowing on a tablet inside the command vehicle. He saw blue icons. Planned routes. Patrol boundaries. Drone coverage arcs. He saw advantage. He had 300 soldiers. Armored vehicles. Mortars. Thermal drones. A clean objective. Secure the processing plant. Hold the valley. Open the corridor. Numbers solved problems. Technology solved problems. That belief had worked for him for most of his career. Mara Holt did not think about numbers. She thought about time. At 4:30, she crawled into a drainage culvert half buried beneath fallen concrete and slid a small heat pack from her pouch. She wrapped it in cloth, wedged it behind a broken window frame on the 3rd floor of the factory. She tested it with a handheld thermal viewer. A human-shaped glow stared back at her. Good enough. She dropped through a ventilation shaft, landing silently on bent knees. By 5:15, she was lying inside a narrow cavity between 2 collapsed walls, rifle already oriented toward the valley floor. The rifle settled into her shoulder as naturally as a breath. Her scope dial turned with soft, practiced clicks. She did not imagine herself stopping an army. She did not picture victory. She did not hate the men who would soon enter the valley. Her mission was smaller. Delay. Slow them down. Make them hesitate. Make them question. Every minute she bought meant friendly units farther east had more time to dig in. Every decision she forced meant fewer clean movements. She would not win with bodies. She would win with doubt. As dawn crept toward the horizon, Mara pressed her cheek into the stock and watched headlights gather at the valley's edge. She did not feel brave. She did not feel afraid. She felt ready. The first shot was already planned. The rest would be decisions. The 3rd shot came from the right flank. A squad leader jogging between 2 armored vehicles stumbled once, as if he had tripped. Then his helmet snapped backward. He hit the ground hard and did not move. For a brief moment, no one fired back. Not because they were calm, because no one knew where to aim. "Smoke out now," Lieutenant Colonel Cross shouted. White canisters arced through the air. Thick clouds began pouring across the valley floor, swallowing broken walls and half-collapsed vehicles. "Get thermal up," Cross ordered. "Find the shooter." Men shifted positions. Machine guns swung. Rifle barrels traced empty space. Captain Rachel Monroe crouched beside the command vehicle, headset pressed tight against her ear. She watched the casualty reports populate her tablet. 3 shots. 3 different angles. No rapid follow-up. No panic fire. "They're spaced," she said quietly. Cross glanced at her. "What?" "The shots," Monroe said. "Whoever it is, they're not rushing. They're choosing." Cross did not respond. A thermal drone lifted into the smoky sky. Its feed snapped onto Monroe's screen. Heat signatures bloomed across the valley. Engines. Bodies. Hot metal. Then a steady human-shaped glow appeared inside the upper floor of the ruined factory. "There," one of the operators said. "3rd floor, northeast corner." Cross leaned in. One signature. Stationary. Isolated. A problem with a solution. "She's cornered," Cross said. Confidence crept back into his voice. "Patrol 789, he called into the radio. "Converge on the factory. Bracket the structure. Push vertical. Do not let the target relocate." 3 acknowledgments came back. Corporal Luis Medina swallowed once and looked at his team. Stack up, he said. They moved toward the factory at a jog. Up close, the building looked worse than it had on satellite. Whole sections had collapsed inward. Stairwells sagged. Chunks of concrete hung overhead like loose teeth. The air inside smelled stale and metallic. Every footstep echoed. Medina raised a fist. The team slowed. Helmet lights flicked on, narrow cones cutting through dust. They climbed over rubble, boots crunching softly. "Thermal still shows target above us," Medina whispered. "Copy," came the reply. They reached the second floor. The ceiling above them was cracked and bowed. Loose wires dangled. Wind whispered through shattered windows. Medina pointed upward. 2 soldiers moved toward the stairs. At the same moment, Mara Holt was already sliding backward through a maintenance shaft on the opposite side of the building. The shaft scraped her shoulders. Flakes of rust fell into her collar. She did not rush. She did not look back. She dropped from the shaft into darkness and rolled, absorbing the impact. Her rifle was in her hands before her knees fully straightened. She moved low, hugging the wall, slipping into a space between 2 stacked supply crates. From there, she had a clear line down a corridor the patrol teams believed was secure. Up on the 3rd floor, Medina reached the glowing heat source. He froze. "It's not a body," he whispered. One of his men reached out and pulled the cloth away. A small heat pack tumbled onto the floor, still glowing. "Decoy," Medina said. The word barely left his mouth before the first shot cracked from below. A soldier on the stairwell screamed and spun sideways. Blood splashed across the wall. Another shot punched into a radio handset, shattering plastic. Comms died in Medina's ear. Panic surged through the stairwell. "Contact low," someone shouted. "Contact behind us." The echoing building twisted every sound. Shots came back in wild bursts. Muzzle flashes lit empty corners. No one hit anything. Mara fired once, then shifted 6 feet to her left. Fired again, then slid backward into shadow. She did not stay to watch results. She did not need to. Her job was not to win the gunfight. Her job was to fracture it. Medina dragged the wounded soldier into partial cover. "Where is she?" someone yelled. No answer came. Outside, Patrol 8 reported taking fire from the factory's west side. Patrol 9 reported a muzzle flash from ground level on the south wall. The reports contradicted each other. Captain Monroe stared at the scrolling data. Angles did not line up. Distances did not make sense. "It's one shooter," she said slowly. Cross snapped his head toward her. "How do you know?" "Because the timing is consistent," Monroe said. "And the pattern is consistent. She fires, relocates, waits. No overlapping shots. No pairs." Cross clenched his jaw. Inside the factory, Mara was already gone. She slid through a narrow opening behind the crates, dropped into a shallow trench, and crawled toward a vertical ladder embedded in a collapsed wall. Her gloves brushed damp concrete. Her breathing stayed slow. She climbed down. Below her, the maintenance tunnel waited. Teams kept shouting over broken radios. They were looking up. They were looking outward. They were not looking under their own boots. What would you have done in that moment? Captain Monroe stood beside the hood of the command vehicle, eyes fixed on the growing cluster of red icons around the factory. Too many arrows. Too many overlapping movements. None of it was resolving. "She's moving underneath them," Monroe said. Lieutenant Colonel Cross did not look away from the screen. "You don't know that." "The angles don't match vertical movement," Monroe replied. "And the time gaps are too clean. She's not climbing floors. She's relocating horizontally." Cross exhaled through his nose. "This valley was industrial," Monroe continued. "Old processing lines. Drainage channels. Maintenance tunnels. They would have run everywhere." "We've got thermal coverage," Cross said. "If she was underground, we'd see heat signatures." Monroe shook her head. "Not if she's submerged. Not if she's under thick concrete." Not if she planned for it. Cross said nothing. He didn't order tunnel sweeps. He didn't pull teams back. He kept pushing. Because pushing was familiar, Mara Holt slid forward on her stomach through black water that smelled faintly of rot and fuel. The tunnel ceiling brushed the back of her helmet. Her rifle was cradled across her forearms, held high to keep the action dry. Cold water soaked into her sleeves. She ignored it. Her breathing stayed slow, in through the nose, out through barely parted lips. Each movement was deliberate. No splashing, no sudden shifts. The tunnel bent left, then right, then dropped slightly. Mara counted each change. She had memorized this section hours earlier. She paused beneath a collapsed slab and reached into a pouch on her chest. A small civilian radio, modified. Wrapped in tape, she rotated the dial a fraction. Voices slid into focus. Fragmented. Urgent. W, south stairwell clear. W, taking fire from below. W, lost comms with 7. Mara listened. She did not smile. She did not feel satisfaction. Information was simply another tool. She learned which teams were closest to panic, which units were trying to regroup, which frequencies command was using as backup. Then she crawled again. The tunnel rose toward a vertical shaft reinforced with rusted metal ribs. Light filtered down from a cracked grate above. Beyond it, less than 40 meters away, sat a relay antenna mounted beside the command vehicle. It pulsed faintly with activity. Mara studied the space. 2 soldiers stood near the antenna, both looking outward. Both focused on the factory, neither looking behind them. She could have taken either one. A clean headshot. Maybe 2. Instead, she slid a small tool from her pouch. Extended the cutting prongs. She rose just enough to reach the cable bundle running into the relay box. One quick squeeze. Another. The cable parted with a soft snap. She lowered herself back into darkness. The soldiers never turned. Inside the command vehicle, Monroe's headset crackled. Then went dead. She tapped it. Nothing. Cross looked up. Switch channels. Operators flipped dials. Static answered. Some radios still worked. Others did not. Then more went silent. Reports came in late. Broken. Incomplete. Patrol 8 could no longer reach Patrol 9. Medina's team could not reach Command. Command could not reach half the perimeter. The battlefield began shrinking. Not physically, mentally. Soldiers glanced at their radios, tapped headsets, swapped batteries. None of it fixed the problem. A private near the outer cordon whispered to his buddy, "This isn't normal." His buddy didn't answer. Inside the factory, no shots had been fired for nearly a minute. The silence felt wrong, not comforting, not stable, wrong. Captain Monroe looked around at the men standing near the command truck. They were still, not relaxed, waiting. The kind of waiting that tightened muscles instead of easing them. "She's shaping us," Monroe said quietly. Cross stared at the valley. Smoke drifted. Dust settled. Somewhere inside the ruins, a single mind was still moving. Soldiers did not say the word out loud. They didn't call her a ghost. They didn't call her anything, but the whispers began anyway. Low, unorganized, uncontrollable. She's everywhere. She's underground. She's listening. No one knew which rumor was true. That made all of them feel true. Mara Holt slid deeper into the tunnel network, water rippling softly around her elbows. Above her, hundreds of armed men searched empty rooms. Below them, one woman was already planning her next decision. The valley felt colder, not because the temperature had changed, because confidence was draining away. Lieutenant Colonel Cross stared at the command map, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot from staring too long at shifting icons. "The tunnels are the problem," he said finally. "Then we clear the tunnels. Captain Monroe opened her mouth, closed it. Cross was already issuing orders. Sergeant Aaron Wolfe, take Team 10. Enter from the east drainage line. Sweep slow. Report every intersection. Additional patrols will follow. Wolfe acknowledged without hesitation. He had been in the army long enough to understand two truths. Orders were orders. And hesitation killed. Wolfe gathered his men near a collapsed culvert where black water flowed lazily into darkness. 6 soldiers, all experienced, all armed, all trying not to think about how a single unseen shooter had already humiliated an entire element. They clicked on helmet lights. White beams stabbed into the tunnel mouth. The air that rolled out smelled wet and ancient. Single file, Wolfe said. They stepped inside. The temperature dropped almost immediately. Condensation coated the walls. Water dripped from overhead cracks in slow, steady ticks. The tunnel narrowed after 10 meters, then bent again. Above ground, Cross watched Team 10's icon move along the map. Satisfied, he ordered 2 more patrols to stage near other tunnel entrances. If she was underground, he would collapse the maze on top of her. Inside the tunnel, Wolfe's boots splashed softly. No one spoke. Their breathing echoed louder than any enemy movement. The first flicker happened 20 meters in. Helmet lights dimmed. Returned, dimmed again. "Check power draw," Wolfe whispered. A soldier behind him tapped his battery pack. "All green," he said. Another 10 meters. The lights went out. Complete darkness. Then night vision snapped on automatically. The tunnel turned into grainy green. Depth vanished. Walls seemed closer than they were. Distance became a suggestion. "Stay tight," Wolfe said. The words sounded louder than he intended. Something brushed his shoulder. He spun. Nothing. Probably condensation dripping from overhead. Probably. Behind him, a soldier took one more step, then another, then stopped. "Ramirez?" Wolfe whispered. No answer. Wolfe turned. Ramirez was gone. The space behind Wolfe was empty. No struggle, no noise. No splash, just absence. "Ramirez," Wolfe said again. Only the soft hiss of night vision answered. Above ground, Cross watched Team 10's icon pause. Then one sub-icon vanished. "Report," Cross said into his headset. "Static." "Team 10, report." Nothing. Captain Monroe leaned closer to the screen. "Could be a signal drop," Cross said. He didn't sound convinced. Inside the tunnel, Wolfe raised his fist. The remaining soldiers froze. Every man suddenly aware of how loud his breathing sounded. Another step forward. A faint scrape behind Wolfe. He spun. Another soldier was gone. No shout. No muzzle flash. No sound. Panic crept in sideways, not explosive. Not dramatic. The quiet kind. The kind that crawled into the chest and squeezed. "Back up," Wolfe whispered. They took one step. The soldier at the rear vanished. Gone. Wolfe's mouth went dry. Above ground, a second icon disappeared from the map. Cross clenched his teeth. "Push additional teams," he ordered. "They're taking contact." Captain Monroe shook her head. "There's no gunfire." Cross ignored her. Inside the tunnel, Wolfe felt a presence. Not a sound, not a shape. A pressure. The sensation of being watched from inches away. Mara Holt was pressed flat against the wall behind a protruding support beam, her body aligned with the tunnel's shadow seam. Her face inches from Wolfe's shoulder. She had timed the tunnel sweep. Counted their steps, tracked their spacing. When the lights failed, she moved. She did not rush. She slid forward 1 inch at a time, her left arm looped around Ramirez's neck. Her right forearm pressed under his jaw. She squeezed. Hard, precise. No thrashing, No gurgling. 6 seconds. Ramirez went limp. Mara eased him down, secured a zip restraint around his wrists, another around his ankles, gagged him, rolled him into a shallow alcove. She waited, listened, then did it again. She never attacked from behind twice in a row. She never stayed in the same spot. She used the tunnel's curves, its blind corners, its dripping noise. Each takedown happened inside existing sound. Water drops, boot scuffs, breathing. Wolf never hurt her. Above ground, Captain Monroe stared at the disappearing icons. No shots, she said quietly. Cross snapped. They're jammed or flanked. Monroe's voice hardened. She is not escaping, Monroe said. Cross turned toward her. She is controlling us. The words landed heavy. Cross did not respond. Inside the tunnel, Wolf was down to 2 men. He didn't know when that happened. He didn't remember seeing the others disappear. He only knew the tunnel felt emptier, wider, more alive. Fall back, Wolf whispered. The soldier behind him took 1 step. Hands grabbed Wolf's shoulders. Wolf spun, rifle rising. Mara drove her elbow into the soldier's throat. The man collapsed with a soft wheeze. Before Wolf could react, Mara slammed her shoulder into his chest. They hit the wall. Wolf tried to bring his rifle up. Mara pinned the barrel sideways. Her forearm slid under his chin. She twisted. Cut airflow. Wolf's hands clawed weakly at her sleeve. Mara held pressure. Counted. Wolf sagged. She lowered him carefully. Bound him. Gagged him. 6 men. Alive. Unconscious. Silent. Mara dragged them one by one into a sealed maintenance chamber 20 meters off the main tunnel. A heavy steel door hung crooked on one hinge. She eased it open, stacked the bodies neatly. Not out of respect, out of discipline. She left a single glow stick inside. Green light. Enough to keep them from suffocating. She closed the door. Slid a rusted pipe through the handle to jam it. Above ground, Cross received reports of missing soldiers. No confirmed casualties, no wounded. Just lost contact. Cross interpreted silence as death. His jaw tightened. Push harder, he ordered. Flood the tunnels. Bring more teams. He believed he was overwhelming her. Mara Holt was already moving away from the maintenance chamber. Already selecting her next position. Already listening to new radio traffic. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel merciful. She felt efficient. The twist was not that soldiers were disappearing. The twist was that none of them were dead. Cross would not realize that for hours. By then, the damage would already be permanent. By late morning, the valley no longer sounded like an assault. There were no sustained firefights, no coordinated movement. Only scattered reports, broken transmissions, long stretches of silence where entire patrols should have been talking. Lieutenant Colonel Cross stood beside the command vehicle, helmet under his arm, staring at a battlefield that refused to make sense. Nothing was advancing. Nothing was resolving. Every order he gave seemed to dissolve somewhere between intent and execution. Finally, he said the words he had been resisting since dawn. All elements pull back to outer perimeter, hold defensive positions. No one cheered. No one questioned it. Units disengaged in short, cautious movements. Rifles stayed raised. Eyes scanned windows that looked empty. Every shadow felt hostile. 2 engineers were sent into the eastern drainage line hours later, after additional infantry secured the approach. They moved slow, methodical, expecting to find bodies. They found a steel door half hidden behind collapsed concrete. It was jammed from the outside. They forced it open. Green light spilled into the tunnel. 6 soldiers lay stacked inside the chamber. Bound, gagged, breathing, alive. One of the engineers swore softly. Medics were called. The soldiers were carried out one by one. No gunshot wounds. No shrapnel. Only bruising around necks. Pressure marks from restraints. On the concrete wall above the chamber entrance, scratched with the tip of a blade or stone, were 4 simple words. You were spared. The message reached Cross minutes later. He read it once. Then again. The meaning settled slowly. She had been close enough to kill them. Close enough to end 6 lives without resistance. She had chosen not to. Not because she couldn't. Because she didn't need to. Captain Monroe stood beside him. This was never about numbers, she said quietly. Cross nodded. The anger he had carried since the first shot had burned itself out. In its place was something heavier. Understanding. The valley had not beaten him with firepower. It had not beaten him with superior weapons. It had beaten him with discipline, with patience, with a single mind that understood the real objective. Delay. Disrupt. Dismantle confidence. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Cross finally accepted what had been true since dawn. The sniper's goal was never body count. Her goal was control. And she had taken it. The sighting came without warning. No gunfire. No radio call. A private on the western observation line simply froze, binoculars locked on a distant ridgeline. I've got movement, he said. Lieutenant Colonel Cross took the binoculars from him. At first he saw nothing, then the shape resolved. A single figure stood on the crest of the ridge, silhouetted against pale sky. Not crouched. Not hiding. Standing. Small frame. Rifle slung across her chest. No attempt at cover. No urgency. Just stillness. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Cross felt a strange tightening in his chest. After everything that had happened, part of him expected another trick. Another decoy. Another ambush. The figure did not move, did not flinch, did not raise the rifle. She slowly lifted one hand. Not in surrender, not in greeting. A simple, unmistakable gesture. A single wave. No one fired, not because of orders, not because of rules, because no one could bring themselves to pull a trigger. The woman took one step backward, then another, and vanished. A rope dropped over the ridge lip. The line went taut, empty air where she had been standing seconds earlier. Cross kept the binoculars raised long after she was gone. Around him, soldiers lowered their weapons. Some without realizing they were doing it. No cheers. No anger. No shouting. Only quiet. The kind of quiet that followed something larger than a firefight. Captain Monroe stood beside Cross. That was deliberate, she said softly. Cross nodded. He did not ask where the rope led. He did not ask how long she had been watching them from that ridge. He already knew the answer to the only question that mattered. She had wanted them to see her, not as a myth, not as a rumor, as a person, as proof. Cross keyed his radio. All units, he said, hold positions. No pursuit. The words felt heavier than any other order he had given that day. Somewhere inside him, something shifted. For 18 years, his understanding of battle had been shaped by formations, by numbers, by overlapping fields of fire, by overwhelming force. He had believed that if he applied enough pressure, any problem would collapse. Standing in that valley, watching an empty ridgeline, he accepted a truth that unsettled him. One soldier had dismantled his operation, not with superior weapons, not with more manpower, with planning, with patience, with choices. He felt no hatred toward her, no desire for revenge, only a reluctant respect. She had studied him, anticipated him, used his own habits against him. Cross looked around at the faces of his soldiers, men and women who had expected a hard fight. None of them had expected to be outthought. Some stared at the ridge. Some stared at the ground. A few wiped sweat from their faces with shaking hands. Cross straightened his posture, not for authority, not for appearance, for acceptance. He had been beaten, not tactically alone, but fundamentally. The battle had never belonged to him. It had belonged to the woman who chose when to be seen, who chose when to vanish. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Cross lowered the binoculars. In his career, he had commanded thousands. That morning, he had been commanded by one, and he understood it. Goalie, finally. The processing plant was never taken. By the time higher headquarters pushed additional units into the sector, the opportunity window had closed. Friendly reinforcements from the east arrived first. They dug in. They locked the corridor. The valley changed hands without another shot fired. Whatever had been planned for that factory no longer mattered. Mara Holt was already gone. No footprints, no shell casings that told a story. No final position, only absence. 3 days later, Lieutenant Nathan Cole walked the valley with a small investigation team. He moved slower than most. Not because he lacked urgency, because he understood he was walking through the aftermath of something rare. Cole found the third-floor window frame where the heat pack had been wedged, found fibers still clinging to cracked concrete. He traced the maintenance shafts, crawled sections of tunnel, measured distances between firing positions. In a sealed chamber, he photographed zip restraints. Standard military grade, not improvised, not crude, intentional. He photographed the carved message, "You were spared." Cole wrote one line in his report. Operative demonstrated complete control of tempo and enemy decision-making. 6 months later, in a quiet classroom at a training installation, Master Sergeant Frank Dobbins stood in front of a projected map labeled only as Valley Incident. No names, no faces, just arrows, dots, timelines. Dobbins did not dramatize it. He did not romanticize it. He pointed to the board. This operator had 0 confirmed kills, he said. A few students shifted in their chairs. Dobbins continued. She delayed a battalion-sized element for over half a day. He let that sink in. Victory is not kills, Dobbins said. Victory is outcome. A young sniper in the back raised a hand. Did they ever identify her? Dobbins shook his head. Files sealed. Eyes only. The truth was simpler. Mara Holt returned to another unit. Another sector. Another quiet assignment. No ceremony. No recognition. No story attached to her name. Because stories create patterns, and patterns get people killed. The valley became a case study, then a rumor, then a legend. But the lesson never changed. The dead cannot tell stories. The spared can haunt armies. And somewhere, long after the valley faded from headlines and memory, Mara Holt cleaned her rifle, checked her scope, and prepared for the next place where time needed to be stolen. Some of the most important battles in history were never filmed. Some of the greatest victories were never announced. They belonged to people who did their job, accomplished the mission, and disappeared back into the ranks. Men and women who do not wear their courage on their sleeves, who do not tell their stories, who do not ask to be remembered. They carry their experiences quietly. They return to work. They move on. Mara Holt was never meant to become a legend. She was meant to buy time. She was meant to hold a line no one would ever see. And she succeeded. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more FOB veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.